rights, the gruesome killing of young Emmett Till, white men dragging a black man through the streets to, quote, skin him before hanging, and other unspeakable acts. When I look at the monuments, I'm reminded of an even earlier time when blacks were slaves with no voice or vote, and the glorification of white leaders, no matter how brave, who led the fight to keep them that way. Yes, the Civil War was also about states' rights for whites, but remember, e pluribus unum. We're all in this together. It's past time to retire the monuments to a museum. Thank you.
From Jennifer Baldwin. I strongly urge you to not bow down to the demands of these anarchists and begin to dismantle our city's rich and colorful history. Pensacola is the oldest settlement in North America and has been occupied and waved the flag of 5 different countries. Pensacola is a unique and prosperous community built by the blood, sweat, and tears of people of all cultures. These monuments serve as a reminder of that history, where we have been and how far we have come. Do not allow yourself to fall into the emotional persuasion of people's political agendas who don't even understand the depth of what they're fighting for. These monuments stand as a reminder of the days when brother fought against brother and when families were divided and blood was shed for a cause that people felt the need to die for. They should be embraced and help us as symbols of where we as a country never want to be again. We must not censor our people, instead highlight our history and educate one another on the many lessons Americans have learned throughout its lifetime. Those that don't know history are doomed to repeat it. To destroy a country's heritage in history is to destroy its heart and soul. These monuments have stood the test of time. Will we really let them fall to the socialist anarchist agenda currently fueling our country? As an elected official, it is your foremost duty to be a representative of the people. Well, Pensacola is not New York City, it is not Chicago, and these monuments have existed here before you were elected and should remain there once you are out of office.
From Johnny Birch, District 3, I'm requesting a delay to the vote regarding the Lee Square Monument. This is a monument that has graced our community for over 100 years, and removing it requires input from all citizens who wish to participate and voice an opinion. Delaying your vote and opening discussion for everyone, not just a few, will inform voters when your re-election is placed before the electorate. Oh, please let me read it.
Okay. Oh, okay. No problem. From Sam Matthews, remove the monument to slavery. The monument in question tonight is there to honor those who fought for the Confederacy and in support of its Constitution. Much as current today, U.S. military swear to defend the Constitution of the United States, those folks swore to defend the Constitution of the Confederacy. That Constitution explicitly included slavery as a right and criminalized those who sought to free slaves. That is not a cause for Pensacola to celebrate. There are those descendants of Confederate soldiers who wish to celebrate their ancestors' support of slavery. In my mind, that means that the cause of those who fought to free slaves is somehow equivalent to those who fought to retain the right to have slaves. I suspect that that is not what we want to greet those visiting downtown Pensacola. That statue was placed there during the Jim Crow era with the intent of reminding the black citizens of their place. A further concern is that it is maintained by the city of Pensacola at a cost to all taxpayers. Imagine a black parent driving north or south on Palafox and having a child ask about the statue in Lee Square. That parent may have to explain that the city maintains a monument to the time when children like her or him were bought and sold at the will of white folks. I think the time is exactly right to begin divesting the city of an overt salute to those who fought to retain slavery as per the Confederate Constitution. Germany has removed all vestiges of the period of time when Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party ruled. They have moved forward. It is time for us to do so.
From Klaus Dieter Naumann. Delay because it has been here for 130 years. What's a few more months? Why the rush? Delay so both sides can be heard. It took almost 2 years of discussion from citizens regarding naming the 420 million Memorial 3-mile bridge to General Chappie James, an African American. Delay because many on the other side need their voice heard without repercussions to their businesses for speaking out. Delay because many on the side of keeping history are older and not as tech savvy to navigate a virtual meeting. Delay until the civil unrest regarding police reform has settled. The two issues are not related.
From Stephen E. Millay. Dear Mr. Crayer and esteemed members of the City Council, I request this notice of legal action/comment be read into the record of the City Council meeting tomorrow regarding removal of historical monuments and markers, etc. in the Pensacola, Florida area. I am opposed to any removal of any historical monuments, markers, place names, etc. in the Pensacola, Florida area as a waste of precious tax dollars that could be used in better ways. Further, I oppose the removal of any historical monuments, markers, place names, etc. in the Pensacola, Florida area as an action that will open a Pandora's box of worms for the potentially endless amount of litigation that will ensue from such precedent that it appears you intend to perform in regard to remove a statue in downtown Pensacola. If you follow through with removal of any historical monuments, markers, etc., then it will be precedent for the removal of anything that exists in our area that offends anyone of any race, color, creed, religion, ethnicity, etc. In the event historical statue removal precedent is set here in Pensacola, then it is my intention to pursue litigation on behalf of all groups that have been offended by any statue, historical or not, marker, place name, street name, and so forth that offends any of the groups they may offend. For example, there exists a DeLuna statue in Pensacola. This statue offends Native American groups that were cruelly subjugated, murdered, and removed from their native land, Pensacola, by the Spanish and other colonists. Therefore, it will have to be removed also. Another example are the many street names we have in Pensacola. Most of these were persons who had racist beliefs, such as Palafox and other city founders, that are offensive to persons, groups that are alive today. So
Thank you. From Jennifer Adkins. I hope Jim Little's P&J article about the monument was required reading for the council. The cited article reveals an historical interpretation of Confederate statues erected during the 1890s to 1920s that obscure the actual purpose to intimidate Black Americans, a constant reminder that they would not share the freedom offered white Americans in Pensacola. As Pensacola moves forward as a destination for national and international visitors, we should publicly demonstrate a commitment to historical accuracy as we have successfully accomplished in Pensacola's popular historic district. A historical marker in the renamed Florida Square, the original name, could be a monument to a community bonded together to endorse equity and honesty. The Confederate Monument could be placed in an area that is dedicated to honoring war casualties, a museum or cemetery. If too is history and contains an important lesson, it too is history and contains an important lesson for Pensacola and our visitors.
From Lawrence Algie. He spoke earlier in the meeting.
I'm sorry?
I said he spoke earlier in the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yes, okay.
I'll do Tom Reederer. I am firmly in favor of leaving Pensacola's Confederate Memorial in place and adding historical interpretive material to enable people to better understand the personalities and times involved, enabling us to learn from our history rather than denying it. However, since the removal of the monument seems to be preordained, I would like to propose another monument to replace it. I only recently noticed that Admiral Mason Park, which memorializes every conflict from the Revolutionary War to the War on Terror, has nothing for the Civil War. There are numerous war dead from Pensacola on both sides of that most destructive conflict that deserve a remembrance here as much as those from any other war. A memorial to these dead and to the war in general without distinction as to which side they fought on or any political overtones would be a healing exercise and something everyone should be able to support, especially if it were made a community project. As for symbology, how about crossed Union and Confederate, the first national flag, not the battle flag, flags, and a period bugle? Tom Reeder.
From Terry Lewis. History is not there for you to like or dislike. It is there for you to learn from it. And if it offends you, even better, because then you are less likely to repeat it. It's not yours to erase. It belongs to all of us. I thought this appropriate. The statue in Lee Square, having been there since the 1800s, surely is historical and part of this city. It should not be removed. Why not add memorials to honor others instead of tearing down? This meeting is a sham, as many of you have been very public in wanting it removed. Therefore, I know this is a waste, but I stand for what I believe is right. Teresa Lewis.
From Paula Drummond. I support the removal of the Confederate Monument in Lee Square. Pensacola is home of residents of many races and ethnicities. We are a multicultural population, each member of which should be respected and honored. Pensacola also invites and welcomes people from all over the world to enjoy our hospitality. All residents and visitors should feel welcome in our city, and a monument glorifying racism and division has no place here today. I agree with the suggestion to relocate the monument to a local cemetery. Please vote in favor of removing the monument from Lee Square.
From Kathy Tanner. Mayor and council members, I am requesting a delay of the meeting on the decommissioning of the Lee Square Monument. The pandemic prevents many of those concerned to voice their views. It's been there a long, long time. A little longer won't hurt. Please cancel this meeting like other cities in Florida have due to COVID-19. Let the city speak when there is no stress and COVID-19 challenges are over. Please consider this statue a future Freedom Trail style statue. Civil War and heritage tourism are a billion-dollar industry and the Freedom Trails heal. Please don't hijack Pensacola's heritage. This Freedom Trail style heritage tour can include the 1891 Civil War statue with the soldier in his Confederate jacket and Union pants. Did you know that? Are already there, needs 2020 defined plaque. Fort George bust and plaque already there. Old Christ Church already there. Perry House already there. Statue of Galvez already there. MLK already there. The Pelicans already there for fun. Artel and storefronts, defer to Deborah Dunlap, already there. The murals in Palafox Tower already there. Jackson Square already there. The historic buildings and shops, South Palafox already there. More and more to DeLuna Plaza and visit the statue. See the port side of the ferry. Head to Fort Pickens already there. Use this statue to heal with a 2020 plaque and make tourism dollars that count. Fill hotels and invite tourism. Keep Palafox historical and open for business and car safe for tourists.
From Lori Landrum. Pensacola is Florida's first city, and as such should reflect our city's fine history. I am requesting all of Pensacola's historical monuments remain. If we are going to be an inclusive community, it should include our city's history. We cannot cave to special interest groups. Our city's leadership should stop this divide and conquer mentality and choose to unite our community through preservation of our cultural heritage. We should be a city that chooses education over destruction. If deemed necessary, erect an educational panel to reflect the norms of the past versus the social norms of today. In the alternative, place a referendum on November's ballot and allow the voters to decide rather than it being decided by only a few.
From Bill Williams. Removing statues is similar to burning down your local power plant because you dislike your power bill, or letting the uninformed walk the street with their butt hanging out, but you want to take down an historic statue is a landmark.
From Joe Hemmer. I grew up thinking the monument in Lee Square was a monument to the Confederate who died during the Civil War. We now know that to be imprecise. Honoring those poor souls who lost their lives in an awful war was camouflage for the furtherance of white supremacy. We must hope that Pensacola has become a city that welcomes all peaceful people and cultures and encourages diversity in all lawful endeavors. The issue before us is not the loss of history, but the maintenance of honor. I urge the City Council to remove the monument and, if feasible, donate it to St. John's Cemetery.
From Andrew Strickland, Esquire. My name is Andrew Strickland. I placed a half-page color ad in the Pensacola paper during the entire 4th of July weekend in support of Mike Hill and in support of Lee Circle. I respectfully ask that you do not take the neo-Marxist approach to the path of destruction. They are never satisfied and will try to remove or destroy something else unless you stand up to them. Real Americans build monuments. We don't remove them. Any Republican commissioner who lacks the mental and spinal fortitude necessary to build upon our common heritage and past doesn't deserve to be in office, regardless of how much money the low-wage, open borders, corrupt Chamber of Commerce donates to your campaign. And your constituents will know why.
From Debbie Lee. The Reconstruction era lasted 20 years, from 1865 to 1885. In 1881, Confederate General and future Florida Governor Edward Ellsworth Perry led a movement to erect memorial in Tallahassee honoring the state's Confederate dead. Fundraising efforts were slow, with most donations coming from Perry's own Escambia County. After his death in 1899, only $3,005 had been raised, all but 87 of which from the Pensacola area. In April 1890, the project was revived by William Dudley Shipley, and its location moved to Pensacola. It would be built on Gage Hill, former site of Fort George, where Florida Square had recently been renamed Robert E. Lee Park in honor of the Confederate general. On August 15, 1890, the Ladies Monument Association was founded to plan and execute the memorial. Angela Mallory, wife of Confederate Navy Secretary Stephen Mallory, was elected president. Shipley's wife, Anne, was vice president. Anne J. McGuire was secretary, and Laura Thornton was treasurer. After Appomattox, the group contracted with Washington-based J.F. Manning and Company to build a monument for $5,000. It was to use granite from Richmond, Virginia, former capital of the Confederacy, and would feature inscriptions honoring Jefferson Davis and Pensacola's Confederate heroes. Atop the monument would be an 8-foot statue of a Confederate soldier modeled after John Adam Elder's 1880 painting After Appomattox that hung in Richmond Capitol Building. The same image was used as a model for an Alexandria, Virginia monument erected in 1889.
From Kim Penton. In today's new cancel culture society, I feel like what we are really witnessing is a few and not the majority who are wanting to erase history without understanding or having engaging discussions as to why we should not remove history. What is cancel culture anyway? It's groups of people who are being duped into destroying historical monuments without even having the knowledge of what they are destroying. If we remove history, who will teach future generations about the past? No matter how many statues you take down, you cannot change history, but you can learn from it, and we should learn from it. No one today is or has been a slave nor a slave owner. There has been a meme on social media circulating recently that was of a little white girl and a little Japanese girl saying, "Ask her, the white girl, to apologize for slavery is like asking her, the Japanese girl, to apologize for Pearl Harbor. History is good and bad. We must accept history, warts and all." More proof that history should not be forgotten. Auschwitz, among other historical death camps, will not remove the gas chambers that killed nearly 2,700,000 Jews during Nazi Germany regime. This is a horrific time, killing so many innocent men, women, and children. Why would they not want to destroy anything left from that period of time? The reason is we should not forget. It should be taught and remembered not only to memorialize and honor those who lost their lives, but to make sure history doesn't repeat itself. The argument to remove statues will bring people together, and lower crime rates should also be examined. As a native and former Louisianan, I can tell you that removing Confederate statues in New Orleans did not make any difference to the high crime rates. The Robert E. Lee statue, formerly located in Lee Circle in New Orleans, was sculpted by Alexander Doyle in 1884.
Thank you. From Emily Echevarria. Good day. Pensacola's identity as a city has long been tied to its history. But as we move forward to make our city a better place for all citizens, it's long past time to reckon with the ugly aspects of that history that are deeply embedded in colonialism and systematic racism. The Confederate Monument has no place in a public square where it stands as a symbol of the state-sanctioned racism and violence suffered by black citizens. I fully support removal and renaming the square as one of many steps Pensacola leadership can take to begin to acknowledge the long shadow of racism that stretches over many aspects of Pensacola's rich history that have been whitewashed and ignored for far too long.
Okay, from Kathy Winters. I'm requesting that this email be read at the City Council meeting. This is such a sensitive topic that elicits emotions no matter what your opinion. The city of Franklin, Tennessee faced a similar situation in 2017, and they came together as a community to develop a plan of action. It became known as the Fuller Story Movement. Community leaders and government officials came together and made a determination that rather than removing the Confederate statue, they would create plaques which would provide a fuller story. Pastor Chris Williamson is quoted as saying, "What we want was equal footing, and if you will, a place of equal nobility to tell other stories that haven't been told. Stories that will bring the community together as well as bring knowledge of the past." Their city council moved forward and placed new historical markers near the Confederate Memorial. These plaques tell the fuller story and highlights the shared history. The markers tell the stories of the African American experience before, during, and after the Civil War. The cost of the plaques was covered by community donations. In addition, what it would take to remove the statue could be applied to help cover the costs. Removing a statue is not going to change people's opinion or erase the wrongs. However, providing a fuller story can help to educate all of us and open the doors of communication. My request is simple. Look to a community that has come up with a creative solution, one that will provide the fuller story. Just Google Fuller Story Movement to get more details. Thank you.
From Bruce Partington. Good evening. My name is Bruce Partington, and I live in District 6. I have lived in Pensacola since 1967, except when I was away at school. I had hoped to be able to speak to you directly this evening, but work commitments are preventing it. I wrote to each of you a few weeks ago in support of removing the monument and renaming the square, so will not repeat what I said there. What I want to say tonight is simply this. It is profoundly hard to unlearn something you learned. It is deeply challenging when something we were taught is actually untrue. Seeing that what we were taught in our youth is not, in fact, the truth can seem like a challenge to our very selves. Learning that an untrue truth we were taught was actually oppressive and hurtful to our neighbors can be deeply unsettling. It can feel very much like we are being accused of the wrong ourselves, even though we are not. I have communicated with black friends who attended St. Michael's School and heard what it felt like to see that monument as they entered and left school every single day. Think of the message that monument sent to at least 4 generations of African American children in our city. As you consider the future of the monument, I would ask you to consider several questions. How many black voices were heard in the discussions in the 1890s about the erection of the monument? And if they had been heard, if they had been able to speak, what would they have said? Second, what message does the monument send? What message does it send that it is surrounded by cannons? What message does it send to people of color in our community? What message does it send to businesses considering Pensacola as a place to relocate or expand? What message does it send to our young people, regardless of skin color, about the future of Pensacola? Thank you for your openness to learn and to listen, to unlearn the untrue truths that so many of us learned when we were young so that we can heal the wounds caused by our city's past. Your decision this evening is a decision about the future of our city. I've only got 3 left.
Okay.
From Frank Faber. Pensacola City Council members, while a number of probably good-intentioned residents are urging you to vote to remove the monument, there are many who are for leaving historical monuments of all varieties in place. I am a native of Mobile, Alabama, and have lived in Pensacola since 1972, some 48 years. As a downtown Pensacola business owner for 39 years, I had the pleasure of working with employees of white, black, brown, and yellow heritages. I am not a racist. However, there are some that might call me racist because I am not afraid to say that I believe the black, white, blue, and all lives matter. I have driven by Lee Square Monument many, many times, but have never stopped to even read the inscriptions, if there. I have no real ties to the monument, but believe that our history is extremely important and cannot be changed. As is said, ignore history and it will repeat. My objection to removal of the monument is that it will only be the first step in Pensacola to change our culture. You are well aware of what is going on nationwide, moves to change names of military bases, sports teams, streets, and who knows what. Next will come the street names such as Jackson. There will be no end unless you have the backbone to take a stand against any and all efforts to correct our past by removal of monuments, changing names, and perhaps rewriting our history books. If the pressure on you, the City Council, is too great to take a stand, then put the matter on the ballot and let the voters decide. From Whitney Evans. I was born and raised in Pensacola, and 5 years ago returned to start 2 small businesses. As an avid student of history, as well as a proud native Pensacolian, I wanted to share my thoughts on the statues. Robert E. Lee was a complicated man, for sure, but honoring him in Pensacola makes very little sense, as he never really spent significant time in the city, nor contributed to its success. The statues in question, as well as the renaming from Florida Square, were done in the spirit of intimidation and white supremacy well past Robert E. Lee's lifetime. Over 100 years later, one would hope that we have moved past the ugly blot in our city's history and would make the right decision to return the square to a space that is inclusive to everyone. Please count my vote in favor of removing the Confederate statues and homages to Robert E. Lee. And that was from Whitney Evans. And finally, from Glenn Brown. I am Glenn Brown, he gives his address. Dear Mayor Robinson, please stand up for the citizens of Greater Pensacola today and tomorrow and preserve all of our historic monuments in their original and prominent locations. Reclaim the street name of Lee Square to its original name of Florida Square and leave alone the monument to the dead soldiers. The monument on Palafox Hill stands for the thousands of unnamed dead north and south, not a single person or general or slave owner. Imagine for a moment what a loss to the world it would have been if the Colosseum had been razed in 300 AD. No one person or lost cause is immortalized when you revisit the Roman structures that our civilization is built on, but we can all see the results in the world today. Our city is recognized today because of a visible collection of monuments from the past. The Pensacola waterfront, Fort Barrancas, the old lighthouse, the World War I aircraft hangars, the brick-paved streets, the downtown buildings, and the 1909 10-story First National Bank building. But none are identified by anyone's name, and neither is the lone soldier looking south from Palafox Hill. Thank you.
Now, Mr. Kerr, before we move on, there was one person who sent their email to speak, went to the wrong office.
Yes, ma'am.
And so they sent it at 11:59 today. And so we're going to call that person because it went to the wrong office. Yes.
There's also a person that messaged me that apparently got a number wrong on her thing. She's been sitting there for 4 hours thinking she was going to be called. Can we possibly?
Would that be Kenyani?
Yes.
We thought that might have been the wrong number. So did she give you the right number?
404-277.
What? Hold on. Did you make
Sorry.
up one?
Yeah.
I might know her phone number. She may not want everybody to know her number.
All I know, I think that where there was a, wasn't it where there was a 2, there's supposed to be a 1.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
Okay. And so those will be the final two that we.
There was one more that I sent that apparently we called and that.
She's still listening.
Yeah. Anyways,
If they did not answer their phone,
you're, okay.
then
That's fine.
it skipped. They needed to answer their phone. The other ones that we're going to do are the ones that maybe in our area.
All right, Ms. Mayall, state your name and address for the record, and you have 2 minutes. You're on the clock.
Thank you. Barbara Mayall, District 3, 3011 Windermere, Pensacola, Florida. I just want to start out by, the Vietnam War was an unpopular war. If the majority of the people in this community believe we were on the wrong side of that war, do we tear down the memorial wall honoring those who died in the wrong war? The monument does not honor slavery. It honors those who died in a war in which all casualties were Americans and young men were asked to fight and die for their various states. And all who fought were considered veterans. Tearing down this monument is to dishonor those dead veterans, and that is wrong. And over to my public comment, which I wanted to say before that, but I want to go ahead and get this to you. The City Council meeting tonight on one item, public comment, should have been canceled. Because, and this is the exact reason, I put my request in at 11:59 today to speak. I've waited since 5:30 to speak for 2 minutes. And I just happen to have a few phone numbers. What about the people that put in their request and did not get to speak? That is not fair, and it's not what the Sunshine Law is all about. We are all about public forum. If my elected officials and the staff can go into council chambers and have this meeting in public forum and not just Zoom meetings or other meetings, why can't the citizens of Pensacola that live in the city, that own, basically, we own the city hall, our tax dollars pay for that and your salary and the staff. We were not even allowed, if we were going to wear masks or sanitize our hands, wash our hands, we couldn't even come in there and address our elected officials in person for 2 minutes.
10 seconds
That
left.
is wrong. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am, please state your name and address for the record. And
Hi, my name is Penny I.D. Broughton. I'm a seventh generation Pensacola, and my family was here before the Civil War. I'd like to share an 1887 article from the Pensacolian addressing the justification for removing the multiracial elected government and replacing it with all-white rule. The Confederate Monument idolizes and the disenfranchisement of what was then half of the city's population. And the article says, the city commissioners, the law ousting the elected city government of Pensacola and placing in its stead the whole municipal machinery of rule in the hands of a commission under the will and control of the governor of the state was a surgical operation and can only be justified by the desperate conditions of things then existing. It was a case where the best of rules have exceptions. It was a suspension of the constitutional rights of the people, yet not a denial. It was liberty de facto, but tyranny de jure. It was an open violation of democratic theory and government, yet it was necessary to suspend liberty. Now, essentially, this is the justification they gave for removing our local government. And the editors themselves went on to achieve benefits, holding positions of power in the city, and others like them were able to do so because their opponents were no longer allowed to compete for those positions in politics, business, education, etc. So today, cloaking these periods in American history as simply Southern heritage not only defends and justifies, but it also
you have
upholds
30 seconds remaining.
as a form, these monuments intend to also form and shape how we see ideas, and collective memory, and national identity, and ultimately ourselves and the values we hold dear. So this body, as a continuation of the city government that the title article speaks on, has the opportunity to correct a historical wrong by recognizing this monument stands in reverence to ill-gotten gains, a denial of rights, and it's a reminder of oppression and against democracy. As the city has neglected to make a space
Ma'am, your 2 minutes are up.
of this interpretation, I encourage the vote to remove the monument. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's last of,
That is all, ma'am.
okay, that is all. There are a couple of things we're going to have. We had the mayor and Ms. Myers. They were the sponsors of the item. They will speak first, but I wanted to ask Madam Attorney about the legalities that were brought up in reference to the monument.
Madam President, council members, I'm not sure that I remember during these 4 hours which all legalities we're referring to. I did provide the council and the mayor a memorandum. It was last week concerning a federal statute and a state statute that had been cited to me previously. I believe that Mike Hill, Representative Mike Hill, may have referred to the statute again, the federal statute, when he called in tonight. I have provided my reasons as to why I think the federal statute is inapplicable and why I believe that the state statute also is inapplicable for different reasons. I do recall that Representative Hill cited Trump's executive order during his comments. I looked up the executive order and reviewed it, and really what it's addressing are monuments that are being damaged, destroyed, vandalized, and more precisely, usually it's monuments on federal property. So based on my reading of President Trump's executive order, I don't believe it's applicable here. We're not looking to damage or destroy the monument. If it's moved, it's meant to be moved and preserved. Likewise, it's not on federal property. Right off the top of my head, I'm not recalling any other
Those are the
challenges.
two things that were mentioned. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, and then Ms. Myers.
Thank you for the opportunity. There is no doubt that this item was very passionate, and there's no doubt that this item has been very divisive. I think we sat through 4 hours, which is probably more than we've discussed any item, and we have nearly 50-50 as far as what people indicate. I think it shows a lot of the challenges that you have before you. But before you came to make a decision tonight, I wanted the opportunity for us to look at it, because I think several things we wanted to achieve in whatever we do in the story that we tell of ourselves. We believe there should be an equitable discussion of that. And I asked certain questions of the staff and to get the report back. It was certainly, I think there was one lady who talked about Franklin, and there was some thought that I had that thought that there was some way or another, if we could find a way to tell all of our stuff, we need to all be represented. Whatever we do, I want there to be equity in what we've said. There's no doubt that this is history, but there's no doubt that we have not always told all the history that was out there in the city. I'm certainly sorry if there are times in its past that it has not acted the way it should have, but I think from our standpoint, we wanted to be sure that we discuss that equitably. What came out of that report that you see, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of time, but we wanted to get it done before you had here a week before you had your vote, and you get a chance to see it. And I think some of the things that came back that I fully understand is it seems like an awful lot of for us to get true equity, it would be considerable for the amount that was requested of us. And at this point, I don't see how we put that into honor and just to be stuck in our past rather than dealing with the moments of our future. So you've got what is put forward in front of what has been placed there by the staff from a significant discussion. If you have any questions of staff, we're happy to answer any questions at this particular time. But this is an incredibly, and I fully understand, divisive issue, but I've said so many times that we are going to get through this. But the only way we're going to get through this is by dealing with this respectfully and with what's required by law. And certainly what you have tonight in that discussion is it falls in your hands, but we wanted you to have something. And if you have any questions of staff, we're more than happy to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Myers? We can't hear you.
Okay. First I would, okay, so,
You might need to turn your volume down.
okay, let me see, okay.
You coming in and out.
Okay, so first I would like to thank everyone who had input, either through email, phone calls, whatever method they use. I always appreciate citizens who want to be engaged with their government. I think it's very important. Some people have asked that we delay this vote. However, I don't agree with that because we have been discussing this since 2017 when this issue first came up. We had many people come down to city council to speak in public. We received hundreds of emails and letters, So I think that there's been plenty of discussion. I know I have spent many hours talking to people on both sides starting in 2017. And I understand how passionate people feel regarding this issue. And I've had conversations with members of the Daughters of the Confederacy who paid at their own expense to put the 13 steps that are made out of granite on the east side of Blue Square. And so I'm not unmindful of what this issue means to so many people. But I take the position that I've had 78 years to think about Confederate monuments. I was born in Florida, Alabama, grew up in Montgomery, Alabama, the capital of the Confederacy. I witnessed segregation, Jim Crow, and all of the horrible things that went on. And I do understand that a lot of the problems we're having today stems from historical slavery and racism. So when I look at this Confederate monument, first, we're not tearing down a monument, and we're not erasing history. History actually was erased when the monument was put up. The monument, 3 panels are to 3 men who did not die in the Civil War. And Mr. Perry was from Massachusetts, Mallory was Key West, and Jefferson Davis, I don't know if he ever came to Pensacola. But they did not die in the Civil War. The 4th panel, who the unfound heroes, says that it was their joy to suffer and die for a cause that they believed to be just. I don't agree with that. I don't believe that it was their joy to suffer, because the Confederacy was the first government that had a conscription law in the United States. Most of those soldiers were poor, they did not own slaves, and they were conscripted. The Confederacy conscripted men from the age of 18 to 50 years of age. And the life expectancy back then was only 40 to 50 years. So I think that also there were tens of thousands of slaves, enslaved people who were forced to work for the Confederacy. So, if we're going to learn from history, we need to history that's truthful, not a history that's made up, not a history that's romanticized and quite frankly fabricated. So when people tell me, a southerner who's lived in the South for 78 years, that this is about our history, I don't agree with that. I think the South has a great history to tell, and I think it should be told. I'm from Montgomery, Alabama, and I'm very proud of Montgomery, Alabama. Montgomery has some of the most powerful civil rights museums and monuments in the world. And it attracts tourism. Montgomery is proud of its civil rights history, even though it was a hotbed of segregation and a lot of violence and cruelty and discrimination. They're not running away from that history. They're telling that history. And they're telling it in a very moving way. So this is what's lacking here on Lee Square. There's a truthful and powerful representation of history. So You know, we've heard from a lot of people, a lot of experts, historians, and about what that monument really represents. Let's remember that it sits on the highest hill in downtown and overlooks our entire downtown. And I don't think that's a problem. So I'm asking the council tonight, I support the mayor's recommendation and the recommendation of staff. They've obviously spent a lot of time doing research. They've written a great report. They've been very honest and truthful in analyzing the historical significance of the monument. So I hope that we can get a unanimous vote tonight, that we can move this city forward. We can have a community of unity. And as long as that monument is there, we will not have the kind of unity in this community that we need to move us forward, to be a forward, moving city, one with vision, and one that is on record treating people fairly. And I hope if this passes tonight, that it will not just be a symbolic gesture, but the beginning of a real change for our city.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now, I didn't see any views from speakers, and I can start to my left here with Ms. Hill. Did you want to speak to this item?
Yes, I also am very glad that we had this much interaction with the citizens. I believe it was very open and under a very stressful time with all this masking and disease. I think we had quite a bit, 4 hours of discussion on the citizens' part. I think with the statue, we have to include those stairs. I don't think that was mentioned in some of the taking it apart, and I want to make sure that that is included. If we go with the whole thing, I think from my point of view, I would like to see the actual statue removed first, and then at our leisure, figure out what else needs to be done. But I think that would be the first thing is to remove the actual figure.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Tahar?
Yes. Obviously, I think we've all gotten a lot of phone calls and emails and whatnot from dozens and dozens and I'd say hundreds of people on this issue. And I've had conversations with lots of different groups and people, and the one thing that's been said tonight, and I had a discussion with someone, I think that called in today, and I think we have an opportunity to do something like they did in, I think it was Tennessee they talked about earlier, that where you could have some community support for a monument that would not be encompassing of everybody, but would be encompassing of more the ethnicity and the diversity that we have in Pensacola. So I'm not going to support removing this at this time. I think we can make some modifications immediately that will set us down the right path. The idea, again, I spoke with a gentleman about this, of removing the 4 inscriptions on the monument itself and then adding our Union Dead to the north side, I think would be a good start. And then that would give us time to replace those 4 inscriptions with something that's more adaptive of the learning that people, I think, referenced tonight about having a plaque saying that this war was fought for essentially slavery, which I think it was, but have something on there talking about that, because it was said earlier about how there were lots of Union soldiers that were in Pensacola for a long time, and I'm sure lots of them died, so we need to recognize them too. And I think a memorial is something that is positive. It's something that shows that you respect people on both sides that did, yes, that did fight for stuff that they believed in. And I believe Ms. Myers said it perfectly. I think the majority of Confederate soldiers were forced to fight. They didn't forced to fight. They thought it was a duty, then they needed to do it. And so same with the Union soldiers. There are probably some Union soldiers who didn't want to go down to the South and fight this new country that's been formed. So there's lots of dead soldiers that need to be honored, and I think we can do that. I don't think that we need to haphazardly just go ahead and say, let's just take this thing down and just wish it away. I think we need to adapt it. I think we need to make it more inclusive, and I think we can do that. And I think if we can take a first step tonight, I think that'd be a good idea. I'd be interested to hear what other people have to say, but that's my 2 cents on what we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Moore?
Where are we at? There's a lot of questions, I guess, in my mind. So the first question was whether we were going to act tonight. It sounds like that's answered. We're acting tonight, which is where I certainly saw us going. Are we at the question then of what we're specifically addressing here? Are we doing the whole kit and caboodle?
We are here with the recommendation is the removal
Of all of it.
of the Lee Square Confederate.
There's just so many
Monument.
different elements there. I thought it was my expectation that we were going to address several different questions.
Okay, what question would you like to address, Mr. Moore?
Yeah. I like that. So what we're speaking about here are all the elements. We're talking about the pedestal. So there's several different elements here. Like, is there going to be a removal, and what? And if there is, then where?
The question, and we could be here, for the next 15 years, talking about where things are. And the recommendation here is to the removal, and then the disposition of the monument where those things go will go to the mayor.
Okay.
And to the staff side, because everyone has bits and pieces that they want to go to. And so that is going to be turned over to the mayor and staff to be able to address that. Because what will happen is we could say, well, we recommend it to go to St. Joseph's, or we recommend it to go to the UWF Trust, or we recommend parts of it to go to the Perry, Heritage Society. So we'll be here all day trying to determine which parts go where.
Perfect. So what we're considering right now is whether to decommission or
To decommission
leave.
it, and then
And we'll leave that to the mayor. We're giving the mayor the authority to
right.
decide what
to
to
des-
do with if
to
we choose
decide
to
that
decommission.
disposition of
Okay.
it. And that makes it where all sides will be able to, or all recommendations will be able to be looked at and see what is feasible, about the cost and so forth. So I believe that was a better process.
Yes.
Versus every item trying to determine which parts go where you do this, and because all of it is the same to me. So,
Okay.
And that would be easier to deal with. And if there's a question or something, the mayor can always bring it back and ask us about it.
Perfect.
But to take the Confederate monument and remove it, we want to make sure that we do everything respectfully. We want to make sure that we do everything with dignity, and there is a location of it. So.
Perfect. And perhaps I overlooked something there. Somehow I wasn't clear, so I apologize if I overlooked it right there in broad sight in front of me. As far as where my thinking on the issue is I think right out of the gate, the first point I'd like to make is I think in a lot of ways our local narrative here was preempted by the national narrative. And I think as we have these difficult discussions, we're talking about potential divisions within this community. There's some difficult discussions we have to have. There's a question there that we're asking, the thesis that we're responding to. And I think if we respond to this national narrative that there's, racist bigots on one side defending this monument and communist usurpers that somehow leaked this hidden strategy they had to destroy the entire fabric of the country, starting with this monument, it becomes an easy step to dismiss the other side. And I think we really miss an opportunity to come together to dialogue and discuss these things. So the first point I want to make there, that's a point I heard reiterated over and over again through these calls, that I don't believe either of those two extremes is true. I think we have Southerners, people with fond associations and loyalties to the South, and there's a lot of great things about the South, right? I grew up in a Southern home, so understand the appreciation for hard work and honesty. I don't know, many of your conversations, my great-grandmother's passed, but nobody can rip you a new one like a granny, right? And I know I got several new ones ripped this week on some of these calls, but it always tickled me because it would come back to, all right, sugar, have a good evening. Thank you for your time. There was like this Southern politeness that it would come back to. So I think that's the first point there, is that we don't have these two extremes that as we have this discussion. As far as where we are on that, I support the respectful decommissioning of the monument. There are the elements there. I think it'll be a difficult thing to recraft it. If there's a vision there, I'm certainly interested in hearing the vision on how we could amend this monument to make it equitable, to make it something that's not inflammatory. I've just spoken to too many individuals in this community that have seen things, experienced things in this community with this monument, that I don't think it would be fair to ask them to see it as a neutral, fond, Southern thing, that it's inflammatory and painful for them. So if there's a way to do that and succeed in making it a neutral symbol, I'd be interested to hear that. But I think at this time that concludes my comments. I think we're to the point where we've got to respectfully decommission it. That's where I am. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Gerald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will approach this situation, first of all, to say that as a former teacher, this was more than a history lesson. It was a history semester to talk about it and all the different opinions. But first of all, let me say that I prefer the term, instead of removal, I prefer the term relocation. That's what the mayor is talking about. Removing it from where it is and relocating it, because history is what it is. It cannot be erased. So it's erroneous of the people who said, well, I don't want to erase my history. I don't want to eliminate my history. That cannot be done. History is what it is. So what I'm thinking about and what I understand is that I've heard over and over, where do we go from here? What do we do next? I know what we do next. First thing we'll do is to eliminate our attitudes and our behaviors that cause us to do some of the things that we've been doing. That's number one. Simply because, furthermore, to change and to move forward and to think about what we've been doing. And I heard it came out in some of the letters, not everybody, but in some of the letters and some of the things that people were saying. It's absurd. We have to eliminate some of our behaviors and our ideas. I heard the name Hitler come up over and over. We know how that was and how that went and the outcome, where it put everyone, especially the people in Germany. So what we're not going to do is to go down the same road, but what we want to do, we already know and understand that the present location at Lee Square is inappropriate. Someone sent me a picture of the Confederate flag and a bunch of Confederates sitting around it at Lee Square. We have to change the way we're thinking and doing things. It's time to let go. Because everything that they wrote and heard, and as a former teacher, I can say, and I taught history for 2 years, what I heard them talking about were things that they either heard in stories or things they read in history books. Nobody was alive to know what happened then, period. And I have sense enough to know that. But I will point out that my next birthday, I'll be 74. I know about racism. I know about segregation. I didn't have to read it. I experienced it. So when I compare what I heard in the letters and some of the comments about how slavery and all, and Chappie James and Dr. Martin Luther King, just a whole list of things. That's why I say it was more of a semester of learning. We went from one end of the scale to the next. So if we stop and answer the question, look in the mirror and ask yourself, what do I do next? Let's start over and forget some of the foolishness and get down to the business of being fair, getting along, and bringing people together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wu? We can't hear you.
Turn your, yeah.
We're learning sign language.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'll start off by saying it appears that the votes are there to remove the monument. And I received great guidance from hearing Bertram Hayes Davis speak not long ago. And what Bertram Hayes Davis said was, when he was asked about a statue about his great-grandfather, he said it needs to stand, but not in a public place. And that's how I feel about the monument we have here. The people that have called in have passionately argued against having the statue removed. Well, as Councilman Gerald just said, in my mind, I don't see it being taken down and destroyed, but rather relocated to another location. So if people wish to bring their relatives to come see it, they'll have that advantage. I'd like to thank Eric Stevenson for stepping forward, because he's offered a place where there's more Confederate soldiers buried than anywhere else in the state of Florida. Governor Perry's buried there. I went over there to tour the cemetery. One of the first gravestones I saw said Northup. Got home and I called Larry Northup up and I said, Larry, I saw a Northup in St. John's. And he says, yes, that was my great-grandfather. It's a cemetery that was started by Masons, of which I'm proud to be one. And what's interesting is blacks are buried in St. John's. They did not discriminate. Not many cemeteries allow blacks to be buried there, but St. John's allowed blacks to be buried there. So in my mind, I see it, the people that argue tonight, you know, I've gotten such a history going and preparing for tonight. I've learned about the lost cause. I've learned about Reconstruction. I've learned about Jim Crow. But I have to say, I grew up in Savannah. And the people that spoke, they're defending their relatives. They're defending their grandparents. And they may not have history completely right, but it's what they passionately believe because that's what they were told. But then in closing, what has led me to decide whether it should go, and what has helped me so much is in the Book of Common Prayer, there's a baptismal covenant that we say every time someone is getting baptized. And it says, will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? And if you're going to do that, then my conscience will only allow me to go in one direction. But I want assurance from the mayor and the staff that it will be taken down and relocated either there or at the Historic Trust or somewhere equivalent. because this means so much to so many people. And I want to make sure that those people are not swept under the rug as this gets done. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I have a few comments to make. They are much more in a broader sense, I guess. And when I drove by there this weekend a couple of times, I had once talked to the mayor, but America's foundation has been grounded in the belief that all people are equal. We are all living in this wonderful experiment called democracy. Our country has flourished and has become the greatest country in the world. Yet the basis for this greatness has been stymied in a system of institutionalized racism. Whether it's African Americans in slavery, whether it's Asian Americans, Native Americans, our country has managed to live two lives. The removal of the Confederate Monument in Pensacola brings to the forefront a history that should be behind us. The problem of race in America has just never been dealt with effectively and affirmatively. How can in 2021 we still have the passions that have created the discussion on race, which is important? We have not, as a country, as a city, had that discussion and revealed the scars of racism in America. Citizens continue to struggle with it. Our country, again, lives two different perspectives on equality. At some point, we must stop fighting the Civil War and embrace the equality of all mankind. We continue to fight battles over the 150-year history. We've had marches, we had federal legislation, we had states, and all of these issues to address race. Yet, it has not been dealt with. When I came back from the military, and in the military and came back to Pensacola, I was told not to by a professor who said that Pensacola was not progressive enough for black people. I disagreed and came home. And when I came home, I was called a nigger on more than one occasion. And I hadn't done nothing. I was in a store one day, and a baby, a 4-year-old white baby, said, "Nigger, you need to move." Racism is learned. It is taught. And that's why the Confederate Monument there cannot exist when there is not education, when there's not an understanding of the basis of it. If the city could create a place of history where the true history of our nation could be displayed, which includes racism, because we tend to avoid that. We tend to not call it out for what it is. We'll give it another name, but we must deal with it as a society. Even though there are things that we don't like, all history must be acknowledged. The painful memories, the events, they sometimes remind us of the precious freedom of our society, that we have to fight for it. I am reminded of Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, 7-10, where he's having a conversation with God about a thorn in his flesh. God does not remove the thorn. However, the thorn is a weakness. And racism in America is a weakness in our great country. Racism cannot be hidden away and talked about just on special occasions as it has been done in the past and continue to do. Our history books address racism and our politics about it from the presidency down, which means you get it from the white male down, and whatever impacts the political existence of the time during that event. We can no longer do that as a great nation. I would not want to live anywhere else but in America, because I can fight for those equalities of all mankind. Things have gotten better, but better is not enough. We must be best at being the country of equality for all of its citizens. We should not hide our scars, but heal them through education and respect for each other. The monument in its present state does not provide that education and that understanding on a country that is supposed to be about equality for all. It does not. It has to go in a place where we can include it. I once had a conversation with the mayor. Well, Mr. Mayor, Mayor Robinson, why can't we just put little plaques around there to talk about this true story? Why can't we just put things there to say, okay, this is what happened? But if you're not going to call it racism, then we still don't get the true story. And as I passed by there today, as an individual and a history teacher, would I still feel okay with having the statue there and not a clear understanding of it? I would not approve of destroying the statue. I think that scar, that thorn, and that weakness should be a reminder to us how precious our freedom in this country is. I would like to see us have a place to put it where we can, as a community, come together and decide on how we should express our history in our city and our nation. So I am going to support the removal of and the relocation of it. I would also support the educational aspect of this, the monument, because the monument is about racism. It is about what has happened to the systemic institutions in our country. And so I don't see it as the Civil War reminder. I see it as perpetuating racism in our country, and we cannot have it. We need to understand that history, but we need to be able to move forward. Thank you. Mayor Robinson.
Madam President, there were some questions asked by Councilmember Wu and some of your others just talking about what has the staff looked at. We didn't know what, we didn't want to anticipate one way or another, but we have looked at a couple of things that what would happen, and we have talked to both. We've had discussions if the council was to do something that obviously St. John's has indicated. That may be one thing we obviously talked to St. John's. The other one is the Historic Trust. I mean, there's been much discussion that something like this belongs in a museum, where it can be properly presented in an educational light and interpreted in a correct way. These are two choices that we have before us. If we're so directed by the council, we will evaluate everything. But certainly those two have come to mind. We have also evaluated things that could happen in the event something, if the council goes in a certain direction. And Derek is certainly here. We can get some things started on it directly, but there are other things. The whole portion of it might take a little bit more time, just because of contractor, trying to. As Derek said, there are only a certain number of people who specialize in dealing with historic structures of this age, and the problem is we're not the only community in the southeast that is currently dealing with this. But we certainly have been talking to other people, trying to prepare if the council made a decision. Derek is well aware, and we are trying to move forward on both of those fronts. If we're so directed here tonight, we will look at those things. We came with all options available, and we can look and figure out what happens, whatever, based on your vote. But I did at least want you to know we have talked to both the UWF Historic Trust as well as St. John's. And if something else came up, we'd be happy to evaluate all of those, what would be best, and bring something back. But that would give us at least an opportunity to see the right place to relocate it and make sure that it's put in a respectful context, but in a historical context of what is there. I want to be very clear that whatever we do as a city, and certainly it showed when it was defaced, that we immediately got out there and cleaned it up. And we will be respectful to this monument, no matter what happens. Your decision. It's still an asset of the cities that we will entrust, and we will still respect in any way we can as we work toward its relocation, if that is so the vote of the council.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Okay, yes, Mr. Gerald.
I just wanted to ask, Madam Chair, if we're ready to take a motion at this time.
We're almost, but Ms. Hill has a question.
The one thing in the St. John's, I did talk to the neighborhood association, and they hadn't, the West Side Garden, and they hadn't taken a vote on it, so I asked individuals if they wanted to let me know what they thought about, the monument going there. And one of the things that came through was if it stays up 42 feet, people don't want to have to see it from their porch. So my hope is that if we do relocate it, which sounds like we will, maybe not put it up 42 feet in the air.
You've given us direction, and we can, the motion that leaves that to give us direction, we can always come back, as the council president has said, as we work forward. But at least this gives us direction to begin to move, and we can begin to direct staff in the ways that whatever needs to go to execute whatever decision you make here tonight.
Mr. Moore.
Yeah, my concern, I guess, and certainly grateful to St. John's for their willingness to collaborate with us. My concern there was that they were leaving, that the city would retain ownership and responsibility there for the maintenance, that there would be the continued expense there. Obviously, that's a large structure too, not one to send more than they could chew over to St. John's. For the record, I had some concerns about that being the relocation site. But I also would like, before we wrap up discussion here, since there's been talk of a motion, I would like to discuss the timeline there. I think there's some expectation in the public there that I think we owe that to the public to discuss the timeline. What's a reasonable expectation for a lot of these processes? There's some pragmatic things that have to take place. There's some processes that have to take place, and I would like to know some of those things, and I think it would benefit the public to discuss kind of the timelines, what's required for a respectful decommissioning.
Okay, before Mr. Owen gets there, Mr. Mayor, about the St. John's proposal, you're going to take care of that discussion.
We're going to be looking at St. John's or also UWF Trust for many of the reasons. I know Councilman Moore, you and I have talked a little bit on this about the issue, and I explained to you that there were other options, and UWF Trust has indicated that if the council made a decision, they are certainly in charge of historic artifacts of Northwest Florida, and they would see that as something that would be theirs to kind of show. So we certainly will look at all the issues that you brought up. But I think Derek could speak to some of your, Mr. Owens could speak to some of your questions about, because we have been talking about it. We've sort of tasked Derek to look at things so he knew what was there. We also kind of want to be upfront with you about some of these things we can do faster. Some of them may take a little bit more time if you're talking about decommissioning the whole thing, but he can kind of answer some of your questions.
Madam Chairman, members of council, we looked at a variety of options in the report that was provided from staff to you. I think there were some cost estimates in there to look at a variety of different things, ranging from just removing the statue itself, covering the panels until further direction can be received, to completely removing the entire thing and relocating it to another facility like the cemetery. And that being the most complete option. The statue is estimated to weigh some 12 tons, so it would have to have a new footing made for it. Wherever it goes, it's going to be involved to move the statue and the monument itself. So there's a variety of options. It just depends on what you decide to do, is the timing. We've been in contact with contractors all over the southeast that do this, all the way to local general contractors here that have experience with historical type things. And so it could be as soon as probably have something done in like a 3-week time frame. If we're just talking about removing the statue, covering the panels until you decide to do something further, or it could be, like the mayor said, it could be 60, maybe even 90 days to have the entire thing moved and relocated, because that's going to be quite involved.
Can I ask you more questions?
Yes.
Could you talk to this as far as, obviously, we're not sure where it would be relocated to, so certainly in my mind it seems there's the potential that it could just drag on, that we could be 6 months in, well, we've not identified a location yet, and here we are. Is there really kind of the need to just move it once, that you're not wanting to pull the whole thing down and put it in storage and then have to move it again to relocate it? Is that kind of not a viable option?
Councilman Moore, there's yes, there is additional cost, associated with storing it and then moving it again. I know there was talk about potentially maybe storing it at the port of Pensacola until it was decided the final disposition of it. But yes, there would be additional expense and cost to move it twice, and also the handling of it. It's a delicate structure. It's aged, so hiring the expertise to properly do that is also quite costly. But it just depends on what you decide to do. So.
Madam President?
Yes.
Councilman Moore, I'm sorry my bladder couldn't last. I had to run to the restroom, but I did. We got speakers back there, so I heard the question. I think the timing that we're talking about from having to remove the whole thing, we can certainly have it solved. What we can do. I think we could do that before we probably can get the contractor on board to do the whole thing. As Derek said, there are some things we could do sooner. But the whole thing is obviously in the challenge of how old that structure is, and obviously wanting to be respectful in the right way. Some of it, the way we have to finally get it down, may take us a little bit longer to get the right contractor. Okay. But we can certainly, in that time, have a finalized location to go.
Okay. Tell me this, in the interim, then, if the step we're taking tonight is certainly a strong statement, qualitative statement about the monument and its presence in this community. If we're looking at a 60 to 90 day window that it will remain present in this community, would it be appropriate to, and it could be twofold in that we shroud it so that it protects it from potential future graffiti, but then also if we're saying this is inappropriate in our community, is it appropriate to stay another 90 days?
No, we understand that. We can work through some of that. We've even had some discussions of covering the paneling and beginning that process. So I think we've had some of those discussions. We can work to that point. I'm still looking like I don't want to go 90 days, but I know we talked. We're shooting between 30 and 60 days is what we had hoped to get. If that's the decision you made. That's what we can, but we've sort of been dealing in the theoretical with some of these contractors. We didn't know what was going to be the decision of the council.
Sure. In the interim, until that final decision, and sorry for so many spattering questions here, but I'm just curious. Will the fencing there remain? That park will remain.
Fencing will remain there. It is a construction site. It is illegal to go into it. It's been designated now in a construction site. From all situations that may happen to it, that's the reason we did that. We're going to be respectful with it. If you decide here tonight that it's coming down, we will be moving to come down, but we want to we want to be upfront with you. We've had discussions, and it's going to take some time. I mean, it's not going to happen overnight, but we are. Once we have a decision from you, it makes it easier for our discussions to be, pardon the pun, but more concrete than they have been. Again, so we've been dealing in the theoretical with contractors, not knowing what the decision would be of the board, council.
Sure, absolutely. Then I just have one last comment, Madam President, if that's all right, and I'll conclude my comments. I want to say thank you to the mayor, certainly trying to forecast what questions, concerns, information that us seven would need to have a thorough discussion of this. Certainly no easy task, so appreciate the evident, rigorous effort, and that certainly connects to staff. It would be naive to think this is a passionate issue. It would be naive to think that certainly staff members don't have opinions and passions and convictions on this issue, and I'm amazed at the professionalism of our staff here. They've remained agnostic and run towards goals and work with this in an agnostic way, and I respect that. So I just want to say thank you to staff as well. You're here at 10:30 on Tuesday night as well. So thank you, and that concludes my comments. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hill, and then Ms. Hill.
Okay, and I think Sherry.
Okay, because
Has she had a chance to talk?
Yes, she. Go ahead, Ms. Myers. Ms. Myers.
So one thing I did want to bring up, we've been talking about the monument, that there are 13 steps that were paid for by the daughters of the Confederacy, and they're on the east side, and they are made out of granite. And those steps were not, they were expensive. And so I want that taken into consideration. If we take those steps up, I think that they should be reimbursed for the expenses that they've incurred. And also, I wanted to address Councilman Tahar's suggestion about trying to do something educational there. So I'm wondering about if Mr. Al Robinson, have you considered what to do with the 13 steps? Have you considered maybe leaving them there and maybe putting a plaque there or some type of educational material there to explain why they were there and what was there at one time at the top of that hill, or has staff addressed the issue of the steps in any way?
Go ahead, Mr. Mayor.
We certainly have looked at some things. I don't think we've fully figured out what we would do with that, but I think what I'm hearing clearly between you and Councilwoman Hill is you want us to envision that, and we can do that as well. I think much of the challenges that we have is administration staff is until we really know what you're going to vote, we don't know. So we've kicked around ideas, but nothing, again, concrete necessarily at this point. We're very fluid, and we certainly could work in any direction.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hill?
First of all, if we just remove the statue, how long would that take you to do?
Just the statue itself, Councilwoman Hill, we're looking, I'd say 2 to 3 week time frame.
And to me, that's the key thing, to make sure we get that in motion. I think people will take us seriously at that point. The other thing would be, have you looked at the way the obelisk was actually constructed? Is it in sections or is it a solid unit?
For the most part, it is in pieces. The entire structure itself sits on a significant foundation, and that goes back to what I was saying about it earlier. If it's going to be completely relocated in its entirety, a new foundation would have to be designed and constructed to put it on. So that would take some time.
I, for one, have no interest in redoing it in its totality. The main thing is the art of the sculpture needs to be preserved and relocated, and the plaques, with the statements, like Mallory, I don't know if you've been to St. Michael's, but there's a whole section of Mallory, and, that plaque could go there. What's his name for St. John's? The one,
Governor Perry?
Perry, he's got an amazing tombstone, and a plaque could go over there, and we could just, restore them to their rightful place. Granite, as far as I know, is very expensive, and if this can be taken apart successfully, I don't mind, giving it to other people or doing anything with it. I don't feel like it all has to stay together. The main thing is we have to preserve the statue and find a good place for it.
The process we would follow is, we've been in contact with contractors who do this, historical preservation. We would have to solicit quotes, and then they would have to come over and evaluate it. See, there are no plans, when the thing was built. So we don't know exactly how it was put together, but, people of this profession can come over, take a look at it, and then tell us what we can and cannot do with it, as far as dismantling it, putting it back together, and our options with that, so.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Gerald? And then we're going to be at the vote.
Yes, I was concerned about the time frame that's being considered as well. But I think once the vote is taken, then the wheels can begin to roll. The mayor will understand that he has the responsibility. And then some planning and negotiations will have to be done. Then we'll get down to the nitty-gritty of what's really going to happen. But we can go about it all, talk about it here all night, and we'll never have a solution. Once the vote is taken, and we give the mayor clear instructions and a clear opportunity to take action, then we can move forward. The wheels will begin to roll.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Wu, did you, I see a hand that has Dr. Wu.
Yes.
I'm here.
Did you want to speak again? Are you good? Where did he go?
His hand disappeared.
His hand disappeared, okay. Seeing no others, please vote.
We're going to get PC back.
Sorry, Madam Chair. I did not take my hand in on from earlier time.
Okay, good. We're getting ready to vote, Dr. Wu.
All right.
Councilmember Gerald.
Okay. Yes. To relocate.
Councilmember Myers.
Yes.
Councilmember Wu.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries 6-1. Item number 2 is 20-00337, request for the renaming of Lee Square to Florida Square. The recommendation is that the City Council approve the request to rename Lee Square back to Florida Square. I need a motion and a second. Do I have a motion and a second? I do have a motion and a second. Mr. Creel, do we have speakers for this item?
We have one. We do have one.
Do we have one?
No, I contacted her and
She spoke.
Okay.
Very good.
Okay, we do not have any publics. Okay, we don't have any of that. I don't see the speakers here for this. I have a question, though. The renaming is fine for me. However, the process about what to put on there, I was wondering if that could be a community project to determine what should go there. I think that would kind of embrace and bring the community together. Once the monument, we've decided we have that space there. Is it some way that we can be able to bring the community together to determine what should go on that space?
We will be fast at work to try to bring you something the next time you meet.
Okay.
At least discussion.
Okay.
About moving. On this item here, Madam President, what you have in front of you is actually the 1906 survey of our city, and you can see it's on here. It's listed as Florida Square. We've had a lot of discussion about our history. I mean, this is going back to our history, what it was. Even when the monument was there, it was still Florida Square. It wasn't until later that it was called Lee Square, and I think several people this evening have also talked about how Lee would not have necessarily been in favor of being named for it for these variety of reasons. I certainly brought this forward to the Parks and Rec Board, who did approve this unanimously. And looking, if you have any questions, you're welcome to look at this old map. It does show it as Florida Square from 1906, and I think as far as that is concerned, we're getting back to our history, and we're doing it just in time to celebrate 200 years of being in the state of Florida.
Okay. All right, thank you. I do not see any speakers. So I have a motion and a second. Could we please vote?
Councilmember Geralds?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Wu?
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries 7-0. Seeing that this is a special meeting of the City Council, no other business can be brought forward.